Hi, I'm Emily, and this is my week 1 painting of 12 neurodivergent ways of experiencing the world. So my first shape is covering the neurodivergent attribute of sensory sensitivities, and that is this green shape in the top left-hand corner. The shape itself is sharp and angular with pointed edges radiating outward. This use of jagged line creates a sense of aggression, which directly reflects how overwhelming sensory input feels to me, especially things like fluorescent lights and flickering lights. The lines don't feel contained, they extend outwards, breaking the boundaries of the form, which creates a sense of expansion and intrusion. So this kind of mirrors how sensory overload feels, like it's invading my space rather than staying contained. The principles of emphasis, especially with the black and yellow lines, focus on sharpness and the contrasting colour. Your eye is immediately drawn to this shape, and this is kind of showing how sensory discomfort is not something I can ignore. It demands attention. The choice of the black paired with the yellow surrounding the shape acts as almost like a glow or a glare, intensifying the green. So this uses analogs colours with high saturation, creates visual vibration, which kind of mimics the physical discomfort of harsh lighting. The black and yellow also kind of mimic caution tape, like these things are a trigger for me. Inside the shape there are layered pink marks. This introduces texture and complexity, showing that sensory overwhelm isn't caused by one single input, it's layered. So the repetition of these marks create a sense of accumulation, reinforcing the idea that the sensory overload kind of builds up over time. In terms of technique, I explored layering, high saturation color contrast, and expressive marks, using repeated strokes to build intensity. I also pushed the use of line direction to create that sense of outward pressure. In the overall composition, this shape and the black and yellow lines surrounding it clash with the more calm and structured and organic shapes around it. So the contrast is intentional and shows how the sensory overload interrupts and competes with the other parts of my identity. My second neurodivergent attribute is sensory seeking, which is this shape in the top right-hand corner. This identity attribute reflects how I actively look for certain environments to regulate me, especially natural outdoor spaces, which contrast with the sensory sensitivity. This shape uses curved flowing lines instead of sharp edges, which immediately creates a sense of calmness and approachability. The organic form feels natural and unforced, which reflects how I experience a positive sensory input in outdoor environments. The contrast between the yellow and blue creates visual interest, but it's not harsh. Instead, it feels balanced. The principle of harmony is really important here. All the elements within the shape work together rather than competing, reinforced by the complementary colours used. So visually, the softness of the lines, the controlled repetition, and the balanced colour contrast all communicate a sensory experience that is engaging but not overwhelming. My third attribute is bodily regulation and energy, which is this green shape right here. The identity attribute relates to how I experience physical energy levels throughout the day. This shape is defined by its curved continuous line, which creates a sense of movement and direction. The lack of sharp angles makes it feel fluid, reflecting how my energy levels are constantly shifting rather than fixed. The principle of movement is central here. Your eye follows the curve of the shape almost like a path, which mirrors how my energy levels move throughout the day, productive in the morning and dropping off in the afternoon, and then rising again later. The scale of the shape also matters. It's quite large, which gives it visual weight and importance, reflecting how central body regulation is in my daily functioning. There's also a sense of balance created by this shape anchoring on the right side of the composition. It stabilizes the visual chaos happening elsewhere. just like physical movement stabilizes me when I'm feeling overwhelmed. The smoothness of the edges and consistency of the form create a sense of continuality, reinforcing the idea that even though my energy fluctuates, it doesn't stop, it just changes. Techniques I explored here include continuous line, scale for emphasis, and compositional placement to create balance. So the fourth attribute is interception and bodily awareness, which is this green, orange, and purple shape right here. This shape really reflects how I experience what's going on inside my body, especially with stress and awareness. The big dark shape at the bottom feels like the heaviness I carry when I'm overwhelmed. It kind of takes up most of the space and feels like it's consuming me, just as the purple shape's wrapped around consuming the orange shape. The pink line running through the orange shape represents my racing thoughts, or like my heart rate spiking. There's movement there, but it's not calm or controlled. The uneven organic shapes and messy edges show how everything feels a bit out of control. Techniques used include layered colored contrast, organic shape distortion, and expressive lines to communicate internal chaos. So the fifth shape is special interest and deep focus, which is right at the center of the painting. The identity attribute reflects how I experience hyperfocus, where I become completely immersed in something I'm interested in. It's not just concentration, it's an intense, almost consuming level of engagement that I can block everything else out. Its placement in the center creates emphasis, making it the focal point of the entire composition and the shape you see first. This reflects how dominant and consuming my deep focus can be in my experience. The color red is highly saturated and intense, which immediately draws attention. This reflects the intensity of my focus and engagement. The internal layering of the pattern creates visual depth, which represents how immersive this state is. The repetition of the marks creates a sense of density, showing how everything else becomes concentrated in one area. The edges of the shape are somewhat contained, which reflect how this focus is controlled, but the intensity inside shows how consuming it is. It visually competes with surrounding shapes, reinforcing how this part of my identity can take priority over others. The sixth attribute is attention style, which is this apricot shape right down here. So this shape reflects my completion-based attention style, where I need to finish one task before moving on. I am completely terrible at multitasking. So the internal pattern of this shape is essential to understanding this. It's made up of repeated circular forms, which some are filled in while others remain empty. The filled circles represent the tasks that have been completed, acting like a visual checklist. In contrast, the empty circles represent tasks that are still unfinished. The use of repetition creates a clear visual system reflecting how I mentally organize my workload. The principle of pattern and repetition reinforce consistency, showing that this process is structured and ongoing. The apricot color itself is softer compared to the more intense areas of the artwork, which help communicate the sense of calm and satisfaction that comes from completing tasks. Structured arrangement of the circles introduces a sense of order, showing that the calm is achieved through control and focus. The seventh attribute is executive functioning, which is this red shape right here. This shape represents executive functioning, including my skills like organizing, planning, and initiating tasks. This identity attribute reflects the effort required to create structure rather than it coming naturally to me. The repetition within the shape symbolizes tools like to-do lists, calendars, and structured schedules that I rely on daily. The principle of repetition creates predictability and stability. The use of straight, hard edges emphasizes restriction and the discipline. These elements communicate the structure is not fluid or intuitive to me, but rather something imposed. Attribute 8 is information processing, which is this teal shape up the top. Visually, the form is smooth, enclosed, and clearly defined, which reflects how I understand information. The continuous red line creates a clear boundary, symbolizing my need for structure and definition when processing information. The simplicity of the form reflects a preference for straightforward example-based learning. The oval shape feels complete with no internal detail like the other shapes. This is showing how I process the big picture first. Ninth attribute is emotional intensity and regulation, which is this pink shape right in the center. The attribute reflects how I experience strong, persistent emotions, particularly anxiety and overwhelm. The shape spreads outwards, showing how emotions take up space, but the edges are rounded, not sharp, which shows I still have control. The dots at the end on the inside of the shape represent my habit for compartmentalizing my emotions. I don't express emotions outwardly a lot, which is shown by the detailing on the shape staying inside at all times. The radiating form shows expansion, while the rounded edges soften it, creating a balance between my emotional intensity and control. Techniques in this shape include radial composition, softened edges, and symbolic mark making. The 10th attribute is social energy and interaction style, which is this big blue shape in the bottom left-hand corner. This attribute reflects comfort-based social energy, where I feel most at ease in familiar environments. It's grounded and stable, which reflects how I feel most comfortable around my family. And I have a lot of social energy in those spaces because I feel safe. The shape also has 5 prongs, loosely representing my 5 family members. The repetitive pattern inside the shape reflects background noise, loud, messy, but comforting, which perfectly describes my family and when I feel at ease. Techniques used include scale, repetition, and calming color use. In the composition, this shape grounds the lower section, balancing more intense shapes, showing how safe social environments help stabilize my identity. My 11th attribute is identity masking, which is this shape right here. This shape represents masking, but for me it feels less like changing who I am and more like withdrawing. The identity attribute reflects protective masking, where I reduce what I share rather than altering myself. Visually, the shape is closed off and heavy. It doesn't extend outward, reflecting withdrawal. The dark colours create weight and protection. The red inside represents triggering moments, perceived judgment or misunderstanding that make me want to withdraw and hide parts of myself. The blue stripes act as a surface level mask, partially covering what's underneath. Techniques used include layering, contrast, and visual obstruction. And lastly, the final 12th attribute is strength, values, and self-meaning, which is right over here. The shape represents my strengths, values, and sense of meaning, particularly creativity. This identity attribute reflects creativity as a core part of who I am, shaping how I think and express myself. The form is smooth and contained, suggesting confidence and stability. The yellow lines create movement and energy, symbolizing creativity as an active process. The repetition of these lines creates rhythm, showing consistency. The brightness reflects positivity and purpose.